it's a little terrifying because you absolutely cannot miss.
Goalies now are completely at a premium.
Not, right? Like, Canada doesn't have a ton of great options.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Hockey News Big Show. I'm your host, Katie Gaus, joined by my co-hosts, Michael Traikos and Ryan Kennedy. And guys, we have now entered into that fun time post-trade deadline where we start to hear about all the things that didn't happen and all the trades that might have gone down that didn't. Lots of rumors, lots of reports coming out. But one in particular that I know is going to be interesting for everyone is that we heard about how the Hurricanes asked Toronto about Mitch Marner in a deal for Rantanen. Obviously didn't happen. Marner reportedly refused to waive his no move clause and expressed his desire to stay a member of the Leafs. And then on Sunday, the Leafs GM Brad Marchand had an impromptu press conference to address the rumors and said, "We're aligned with Mitch. We want him here for a long time." So kind of a lot of different reports coming out from both of those camps. Does this change, this news, these reports, does it change the way you feel about the chances of Marner staying in Toronto after this season? And hypothetically, if he doesn't stay, I'd love to know where we think he could end up, because that's been one of the fun conversations as we continue to have this discussion. But let's start off with you, Michael. What do we think about what's going on in Toronto and all the reports that came out?
Yeah, kind of crazy when you think about it. Like, Mitch Marner could have been a Hurricane right now, which is just kind of insane. Like, I don't blame the Leafs for asking him to, if he was willing to waive the no trade clause. Like, basically that was a chance for Mitch Marner to go, no, I want to be a Leaf and I will sign a contract right here, right now, if you want me to. That didn't happen. And I still think that end of the day, it's going to matter. Like, the playoffs are going to really determine whether Mitch Marner is going to be a Leaf. And, at the beginning of the season, we said this. I think the thinking was it was more in the Leafs court as to whether they wanted to re-sign him based on how the playoffs went. Now I'm thinking, if Mitch Marner has a bad playoffs, he might be saying to himself, forget this noise. I've got a young family. I think his wife is pregnant. Does he want to be in Toronto where he's going to spend a whole summer of just hearing it all again? Hey, you didn't show up. Hey, you didn't get past the first round. Same old, same old. No, maybe that's a signal to him saying, forget this noise. I'm out of here. Send me to Utah where I can kind of live in anonymity. But, for me, it doesn't change. Like, it's still going to be based on, what is Mitch Marner do in the playoffs? What do the Toronto Maple Leafs do in the playoffs? And if they go on a long run, then I think he's going to want to sign. And I think the Leafs are going to want to sign him.
Okay.
Yeah, when I think about Mitch Marner in Toronto, you make a very good point about the playoffs, Mike. I also think that, we could see him at least explore the market, even if it's just for a day, and just see what's out there. But ultimately, like, he's a hometown kid. He's a lifelong Leaf. I do also think that when it comes to playoff performances, I think the Four Nations was a big step for Marner. The fact that he was in on two of the most important Canada goals in the tournament.
Yep.
I think that could be a building block for him and an experience that will carry over into the postseason. So I do think that ultimately he will be a Leaf for his next contract, maybe a Leaf for life. But Katie, you did ask, where he could go if he did not sign with the Leafs.
Yeah.
To me, Buffalo is kind of an interesting option because they would have the cap space. And also, Buffalo is close enough that, his family, like you mentioned his young family, but also his parents, we know that it's a very tight Marner clan. They could still go to all his games if they wanted to. So he's not in Toronto, but he's also not far from Toronto. Now, that would be a great rivalry, any Sabres game with Marner in a Buffalo jersey. And I don't think it's going to happen, but if he were to move, I could see the Sabres being an option.
Ryan, did you see how many jerseys were burned when John Tavares decided not to resign in Long Island or on Long Island and go to Toronto? If Mitch Marner goes to Buffalo, Like, oh my God, like the city will burn down. I'm sorry, but he will not be allowed over the border again.
Yeah, they're just literally going to keep him there. Like, yep, you made your choice. You're stuck there forever. The guys on TNT threw out an interesting one. Colby Armstrong was talking a little bit about maybe Pittsburgh being a potential fit with some of the cap space they have. Would certainly be fun to see him playing with Crosby again after what we got to see at Four Nations. But again, I think playoffs is definitely going to be a big factor. Speaking of drama, let's talk about the Carolina Hurricanes. My goodness, they have had their fair share of it. I don't know if it's half on their end. A lot of it's coming from Rantanen and his camp. But after the deadline had passed, GM Eric Tulsky said that they were looking at additional moves before the deadline. But the Rantanen trade took so long and took them so close to that deadline that they missed out on players they were targeting. Kind of like tossing the bag over and putting a little bit more blame on Mikko as if fans weren't already upset. So is this a bit of a cop out, or did Tulsky just kind of totally mismanage this whole situation from the start? Or are we thinking this is more on Mikko and his agent? I also want to touch on the fact that Rod Brindamore had some really interesting comments on a podcast where he said that Mikko showed up literally saying, I'm going to play for 4 teams and you're not one of them. Seems like something you would have wanted to know ahead of time. So what's going on here? Did Tulsky screw this whole thing up? What do we think?
I definitely think Tulsky screwed things up. Like, why not check with Mikko's agent before making the trade? And
Right.
I don't necessarily buy that Rantanen was so against going to Carolina. I just think that Carolina traded him, and then it just became like, I'm kind of upset with Carolina. Like, had Dallas originally traded for Mikko, I almost feel like Rantanen would have said, I'm not re-signing with Dallas. Like, screw you. Like,
Yeah.
that's not going to happen anymore. I just think the way that this trade originally happened really soured him on the Carolina Hurricanes. And I don't think anything was going to kind of move him off that.
Yeah, it did feel that way.
Yeah, I kind of feel like, like Rantanen doesn't owe the Carolina Hurricanes anything. Like, he didn't ask to be traded in the first place. Obviously Colorado made that deal because they were worried about re-signing him and, what that contract negotiation would look like. He didn't ask to go to Carolina. And, it's interesting, Jim Nill had a press conference after the trade deadline. And, he was saying that he had a chance to, be around Rantanen during the Four Nations, but also that, every time that Colorado had played Dallas after the game, he would see Rantanen hanging out with the Dallas Finns, and this is something that we see with players across the league. They all chat each other up after games. But it is interesting that clearly Rantanen already had like this relationship with multiple members of the Stars. So, going back to that Brindamore quote, I don't know. I think, in those 4 teams, clearly one of them was Dallas. And I do wonder if the Canes had maybe done a little more due diligence in the first place, then they wouldn't have been in this mess.
But was it just the Finns though? Like what? Carolina has Aho. They got Cook and Nemi.
Yeah.
So 2's not enough. You need 4.
He does know Aho. They played together at the World Juniors, and Aho told me at the Four Nations that when the trade went down to Carolina, he texted Rantanen like, "Wow, really?" And then Rantanen called him back later that night and was like, "Yeah, I'm coming." I don't know if he knew Kotkaniemi before, at all. Kotkaniemi obviously quite a bit younger, but it does feel like in terms of the Dallas Finns, he had quite the affinity.
Yeah. Also, how many Finns are in Colorado?
Lehkonen.
Okay.
Yep.
I think there's more than just the Finnish thing. And
but it is a thing.
Agree.
It might be a thing. And obviously, hey, given the choice, who wouldn't want to play for Dallas? No taxes, great team. You've got your version of Cale Makar with Heiskanen back there. You've got a better goaltender than most teams have in Ottinger. There's really no downside to Dallas. I just think like he never wanted to move from Colorado in the first place. I think if it was up to Mikko, a contract would have happened probably at the same amount to remain in Colorado. And, what did Carolina get him now for 42 days? Like that is going to go down as one of the worst trades in NHL history just because of how much it disrupted Carolina. Like, they could still have Marty Necas right now, who is off to a career year.
Yeah.
It's almost it's becoming that what if scenario. What if Carolina never made the trade? And I hope that Logan Stankoven ends up just doing what Necas was doing in Carolina. But, if Carolina doesn't go far, if they don't win a Stanley Cup, I think a lot of people are going to be wondering, hey, if Tulsky didn't do this, didn't trade Necas to begin with, and had a proper trade deadline, was this a Stanley Cup team?
Yeah, there are so many what ifs, and it's tough because obviously Tulsky newer in the role, and we talked so much about so many of the good things that he had done. Now, certainly, this is going to kind of haunt him. We'll see how maybe he can recover from it during the summer. But let's talk about some other hurt feelings that occurred. The biggest blockbuster trade of the deadline came right at the end when Brad Marchand was traded to the Florida Panthers. So, since the trade, we've obviously heard a lot from both sides on what went down between Brad and the Bruins. He wanted a face-to-face meeting. He wanted to compromise. He was willing to find a way to bridge that gap. Boston was not willing to get there with him. So he said, all right, then I'm willing to go to basically just Florida. And they found a way to make that deal happen. Was this refusal to compromise a huge mistake by the Bruins? And do Boston fans now have a very legitimate reason to be confused and concerned at what the heck direction this team really is going in now?
I certainly think so. And first of all, seeing Marchand in a Florida Panthers jacket and hat the other day, I felt like it was like a commercial for the NHL where like he's gone undercover to like sabotage the Panthers. It's a funny sight.
Weird.
I think they messed this up in Boston because we talked about it. When the trade initially went down, and we didn't know anything about the face-to-face meeting about, maybe he re-signs in Boston, ends his career there after he goes on, a run with Florida. It doesn't seem like that's going to be the scenario now.
No.
And here's my worry with the Bruins is that they used to have the best culture in the NHL. They had incredible leaders, and they had a lineage of leaders that went like one captain from the other. Now you look at that roster, and a lot of these guys obviously played with Marchand, unless they had just been traded. But how many of those players on the Bruins right now played with Patrice Bergeron? Some. How many of them played with Zdeno Chara? Maybe a couple.
Yeah, barely.
That lineage is completely broken now. So your leadership, you're looking at like McAvoy and Pasternak, and who else? Right. Yeah. So it's like you no longer have that Bruins culture. And I think that's going to sting them in the future. And if this relationship with Marchand is done, then it's a total reset. And you have to hope that your Pasternaks and McAvoys can step up off the ice. And Trent Frederick's gone too. Another culture guy.
No.
And Brandon Carlo.
Oh, yeah. Carlo, I know. Yeah.
Carlo and Frederick are gone too. So you have to hope that the last remaining vestiges of when the Bruins were good can pull them into a new era. And that's a lot to ask.
Yeah, it's difficult losing Marchand, Ryan. I totally agree with you. At the same time, this is sort of the Bruin way as well. Like for years, guys in the Bruins were getting drastically underpaid compared to their counterparts around the league. And it's not a tax-free state, as everyone knows. And they do have to be savvy. Like they do sort of have to draw a line in the sand. And I think that's why Marchand is not there. Like they were willing to do what Pittsburgh wasn't, which is, tear off that Band-Aid and say, all right, our core now is not Marchand, Bergeron, Krejci, and Chara. That's the old guard. New world order here, okay? It's Pasternak, it's McAvoy and Swayman, which is a pretty good core. Like that is the makings of a championship core. And I know they're not even that young anymore, but they're right in their prime, and you can build around those guys. Now, if you overpay for Marchand, and I get it, you're losing a great locker room guy, great leader, and also a guy that's pretty effective. That's a big loss. But if you can use that money and start rounding out your roster, hey, Mitch Marner might be available this summer. Now you've got the money to go after the Mitch Marners. Maybe you can get that culture back and also some productivity as well. So it is sort of a a leap of faith for the Bruins, but would you rather them do this or do what what Pittsburgh is doing and like what Washington is doing to an extent, and just kind of hanging on to their old old guys just because they've been good soldiers?
Yeah, I mean, it's a situation where it's never going to be fun and it's never going to be easy. And maybe even though it hurts right now, they are taking the steps, like you said, Michael, to avoid being in a situation that Pittsburgh's in where they still need to get rid of some of those guys and they stink and they have no prospects and they don't really have a lot coming in. And they are now like in this weird like limbo of like, we're not rebuilding or competing. We don't even know what we're doing. We're just trying to figure it out. So maybe Boston, even though this is hard and this hurts and the fans are certainly going through all of the emotions, maybe it will be for the best in the shorter term as opposed to what we're seeing happen with the Penguins. All right, let's talk about one more big news item, and this is not trade deadline related, but certainly a bit of a shock coming out yesterday from South Florida. Defenseman Aaron Ekblad suspended 20 games for violating the NHL's performance-enhancing substances policy. So this is the first time this has happened since 2018, back when it happened to Nate Schmidt. So it's been a minute. You don't see this often in hockey in general. Panthers only have 18 regular season games left. That means 2 of those games of his suspension will be in the playoffs. So I guess the first question is, do we feel like 20 games is a fair punishment? I know a lot of people online were upset because they're like, how is this 20 games? And Shane Pinto got 41 for all his sports betting stuff. And does this affect the UFA status and all the negotiations that Ekblad is going to have coming up this summer?
Well, I would say that, first of all, in terms of the length of the suspension, I think it's fair. You compare it to Shane Pinto, and all I'll say is, the NHL doesn't have steroid companies or, whatever substances were involved here. They don't have partnerships with them, whereas they do have partnerships with betting companies.
Diana Ball is not one of their corporate sponsors.
No, exactly. There's no Balco sponsorship. And to be honest, we don't know what Ekblad took. I mean, steroid has a negative connotation in terms of like performance enhancing, but it can also heal. So
that's what it sounded like too. In his statement, he said, I took something to help me recover from my injuries and I should have checked with the proper people. It's kind of crazy in this day and age that they aren't doing that, but that's a whole nother topic.
And that's the thing. I don't think this is nefarious at all. He definitely should, like any professional athlete, before they take anything, should check with their trainers and medical staff, right? I mean, that
is the main performance enhancer of taking performance enhancing drugs, is so you can get back into the gym or back on game shape much better, and you're just 100% again. Like, so it is nefarious.
But I mean, if he thought it was something that was okay, to me, I'm gonna I'm going to take him at his word that he thought it was something that was okay, that would help. And obviously, he should have checked with somebody that knew better. And therefore, I think, 20 games is totally reasonable by the NHL, because you don't want guys just randomly taking, substances and drugs when you have literal medical professionals on your team staff that can tell you whether or not it's a good idea. As for negotiations, I don't think it's really going to matter. I mean, clearly it was a mistake. If Ekblad wants to be a Panther for life, I'm sure they'd be happy to have him. It's just if it works under the cap, because obviously they're a team that continually is going for the Stanley Cup at this point, and they have a lot of contracts to think about.
Yeah, 18 regular season games, but it's 2 playoff games. That's what really stands out to me. And if this was earlier in the year, maybe Ekblad gets a longer suspension. But I don't know how you weight those 2 playoff games, Ryan. But for me, that's the equivalent almost of like 5 regular season games each one.
Yeah, 4 or 5.
It's so important. Big loss for Florida, but this is also why they got Seth Jones. Like, it gave them like a lot of depth, and all those minutes that Ekblad was getting, like, they basically go to Seth Jones now. So, Florida's still in a great spot. It's funny though, because, Marchand's out, Tkachuk is out, and now Ekblad's out. What does this mean? I don't think it's going to matter for their playoffs, but it could matter for where they finish going into the playoffs. And if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, this is the window that you needed so that you can hopefully take first place in the Atlantic and avoid a first round opponent in Tampa. Now it's sort of shaping up, and we'll see how it actually how it goes down the stretch. But we could see a Battle of Florida again in the first round, which I think hockey fans should be excited about because
I love it.
Going to be a great matchup. But really, that's also going to be a situation where either Tampa or Florida are gone in the first round, which really is kind of wow. That could be a conference final looking matchup right there.
All right. Well, we obviously had a lot of heavy hitting topics up top to recap on our big stories from the trade deadline. But now let's move forward with a little rapid fire before the rapid fire. So not have to be too quick, but let's blow through some of these topics. Let's buzz through here and just do a little bit of a review, a little recap now that we've had a chance to process some of the big moves. So we'll kind of go back and forth on these ones, but we'll start with you, Ryan. Which team was too quiet at the trade deadline?
I'm going to say the Vancouver Canucks. I don't know if they're actually trying to be a playoff team at this point, and Patrick Allvin had the statement about Brock Besser and him not getting, like the offers were not great. And we're not sure if he meant that Brock Besser's not good or that the offers are not good. It was kind of a little vague, but I feel that, they probably should have traded Besser no matter what. It doesn't sound like the team is really invested in him long-term. So if you're going to already deal Carson Soucy, like either be a seller or be a buyer. And they were kind of in the middle. So that's a little disappointing.
I don't know how Patrick Allvin keeps his job after this year, Ryan, just based on what's happened in Vancouver this past year.
Right.
Like we were talking about a number one team in the Pacific, and now they are just woof.
They're not a playoff team right now.
Yeah.
They're not a playoff team, and they don't seem to have a vision for the future, aside from they have Quinn Hughes.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if you have to stop yourself and ask, are you trying to make the playoffs? Then you're probably not doing it right. All right, Michael, this one's for you. Which team is in a way better spot than they were before the deadline?
Okay, so Ryan, I know you're going to go in the West. I'll go in the East, and I'm going to say Florida. The big winners for me. And again, the fact that all their guys are going to be basically ready for the playoffs means that they're going to be the most rested team going into the playoffs, including Aaron Ekblad now. But they're also going to be the most dangerous. And I'm just looking forward to this all rat line. Do it, okay? Put Sam Bennett in the middle, Marchand on one side, Kachuk on the other, and just let's have chaos against the Tampa Bay Lightning. That's the team for me.
I love the fact that Marchand was just immediately chirping, and the first thing he said when asked about Bennett was still a scumbag. It's incredible. These guys are teammates now. It is, like you said, looking so forward to it. It's going to be so fun. All right, who got way better for you, Ryan?
Colorado. I mean, come on, right? I mean, they were, I think, one of the ultimate winners on deadline day, other than Dallas getting ranted in. Brock Nelson is the perfect number 2 center. Charlie Coyle is the perfect number 3 center. They already blew out Toronto, with that lineup. All of a sudden the Avs, we were questioning their depth all year. Now they have the depth, and they still have McKinnon and Makar leading the way. Fear the Avs.
Other than Michael, who's still not totally sold on their goaltending.
Yeah, you might not need it though. So
it might not matter.
Right,
We've talked about that. We just do Darcy Kemper. He won the cup. You can do it with anybody if you're rolling up front. All right, how about this, Michael? Start us off. Which team got worse?
Yeah, I don't know if they literally got worse, but Minnesota, they're looking around going, Colorado, what'd you do? Dallas, oh my God.
Oh, no.
Winnipeg, you were always a juggernaut and you kind of got better still. What a tough division it's got to be in the Central when you've got those 3 big powerhouses and you're the Minnesota Wild having a good, quiet year. You're making strides and you're just looking around going, oh boy, I guess so. It's next year then. Okay.
Perfect. Pencils in for next year once all those big contracts are gone. What about you, Ryan?
I'm looking at Detroit, and they made the one head-scratching trade where Veleno went to Chicago for Craig Smith and Peter Mrazek. But this is more of a much like Minnesota. This is a matter of teams around them getting better. Where Ottawa gets Dylan Cousins, And, I think he's an upgrade from Josh Norris, even if it's a slight upgrade. And then Ottawa goes out and beats Detroit last night as we're recording this, with Dylan Cousins being a big factor. Yep. Everything has to go right for the Red Wings to make the playoffs. And it's just those incremental losses or the incremental gains from opponents that could really doom them. So, Ottawa is one of their main competitors for that wild card slot, and the Senators got better. And then, you think about teams like Columbus and the Rangers that are also in that wild card spot. Now, those teams weren't very active, but they were already, Columbus is playing better than Detroit. So that's my fear for the Red Wings is, they're either neutral or slightly worse than they were before, and teams around them got better.
Yeah, and they're just in a tough spot. They were already in a battle. It hasn't helped that they're on a pretty tough little streak of not having a great record. So we'll see what happens with them. All right, well, something else we talk about all the time at the trade deadline is, okay, you can go out and get big names or big guys or whoever you get. There still needs to be the opportunity for there to be a good fit. So which player that is on a new team do you think is or eventually will be the best fit with his new team, Ryan?
Well, here's some good news for Carolina fans. I'm going with Logan Stankoven.
Your guy. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, he's already, had a bit of success there in Carolina in his first games. But you think about Carolina players, and they have great scouts, so they often get gems, outside of the first round. Yeah. They're not always big players, but they have great motors and things like that. That's Logan Stankoven, and I think somebody even said that on deadline day, like Logan Stankoven was born to be a Carolina Hurricane. And so far, the early returns are good. And keep in mind, like, we're just seeing the beginning of Logan Stankoven's career. Like, he has not even hit his prime yet. So I think that's going to be a nice fit for Carolina, maybe take a little sting out of everything that went down.
I have something to make him feel better. What do you think, Michael? Who's a good fit for you?
Let's talk Toronto. Why not? Okay. Not the flashiest, biggest trade deadline for the Leafs, but they got what they wanted and what they really needed, which was a number 3 center and a guy to play with Morgan Riley who can be a little physical on the back end. So Brandon Carlo, I think that's the guy that they were looking for, especially if, Chris Tanev may be in and out of the lineup just because of the style of game he plays. So having another guy that kind of plays like Tanev makes a lot of sense. And Scott Laughton is just the guy that is a upgrade over Max Domi and who Craig Berube will eventually like. I don't think Scott Laughton has necessarily fit in just yet. It's been a couple games only, but eventually he will be the guy that, really solidifies that third line.
All right. Well, how about players that maybe we talked about kind of how you scratching your head a little bit based on like what the team was trying to get out of this or what you were thinking they were going for? Start us off, Michael, who's kind of a misfit that you really just never made sense from the beginning and you're not sure is going to be the good spot with a new team.
Let's go Brad Marchand. I think we just assume that he's going to go in there, with Tkachuk and with Bennett, and it's just going to work out great. But what is Brad Marchand right now? Is he a top 6 legit winger, especially on a team as deep as Florida? True. He may only be a third line guy. And, it is going to take a little bit of swallowing his pride if he does end up being just a sort of secondary scoring piece for that Panthers. Ryan kept mentioning Vladimir Tarasenko and how well he was able to kind of fit into that roster. It does take a lot for a player to kind of accept that, hey, I am going to play a diminished role. I'm not going to be the big time scorer I was in my previous team. And Marchand goes from being the captain, the guy in Boston, to now maybe just a third line option on a Panthers team that is really deep and knows what style they want to play. And, I think he'll fit in well, but it's never guaranteed.
Well, it's like I said when we talked about this trade on our live show at the deadline. This reminds me of when they went out and got Claude Giroux. And that one was a similar situation, a leader, a guy who's expecting a big role, who has a voice, who plays a big part. And they kind of almost felt obligated to force him into those positions when it wasn't working. And they ended up suffering for it. Their power play went down. So it's like you don't want to necessarily bring in a big guy and then immediately force him into that role. But I think I'm hoping, and I kind of expect with Marchand, just based on the type of player he is, that maybe he'll have an easier time adjusting, and he is a better fit just from his own game standpoint. But it's something to definitely keep an eye on, because sometimes going out and getting all these big guys and these big names, it's like too much of a good thing. All right, what do you think, Ryan? Who just seems like a misfit to you?
Well, I said this on our live stream show when it happened, and I will reiterate it now.
Yeah.
Casey Middlestat to Boston. It feels like it could have disaster written all over it. The Bruins are very thin down the middle now. And, what was the problem in Colorado with Casey Middlestat is that he was not good enough as the second line center behind Nathan McKinnon. You think about Bruins fans and their fan base, they like hard, heavy players. They like gritty guys mixed with skill. Casey Middlestat is not a killer in that sense. So I do worry that the Bruins are kind of setting him up for failure, where it's like, hey, we lost a lot of great players, but we brought in this guy, and hopefully, he can help us be all right. But I worry that like Casey Middlestat is not the type of player that really craves the spotlight in that sense.
And Boston fans are already just like so vulnerable and angry right now. I feel like this guy's got the shortest leash of all time. Like he has one bad game and they're just going to completely give up on him instantly, because they're hurt and they're sad and they want their guys back. And that's just not what they're getting right now.
I've even seen writers, like Boston writers are like, I don't know about this guy. It's like, whoa,
give the kid a minute. We'll see. Yeah, I don't know. It could be tough. All right. Well, remember, hockey players, that you don't have to spend big money to get pro level composite sticks. You can go to sticks.com for everything that you need. That's STIX.com. So make sure to check it out. All right, let's get into some rapid fire. Carolina's Pro Shop is offering free nameplate switch for any Canes fan who went out and bought a Rantanen jersey. So I guess my first question is, does that mean everyone has a Roslovic jersey now that he's switching back? Or, I guess we'll see. But have you guys ever had a jersey remorse moment?
Yeah, I have one, and it's right behind me. I love this Milwaukee Admirals jersey, but as soon as I got it, they changed their logo to a different skeleton pirate, which is also awesome. So it's like, I love that jersey, but it's like, I kind of wish I had both of them.
Why not
if
both?
I had known.
Yeah, mine's the same kind of story, except different sport. Like, I'm a huge Toronto Blue Jays fan. It's like the one sport where I can still be a fan, because, reporters in hockey are not supposed to cheer for their team. As much as you think I'm a Leaf fan, I am not. But I got a jersey, and it's the black one during like the Roy Halladay era. And then they went and changed it to the retro, and they went back to the original Blue Jay. And I'm just like, that's the one I want. I want the Blue Jay uniform. So, maybe eventually I'm going to go full circle and I'll be like, yeah, that black one looks pretty fire now, but it doesn't look great. Bad era too for the Jays.
True.
I like it. All right. How about this? Pick one. What is more exciting? Trade deadline or free agency? What do we think?
Well, this year, I don't know how you beat the trade deadline. Usual years, July 1 is way better. Just getting a lot of movement, and generally speaking, like a lot of the trades happen the days before the actual deadline. Good on the GMs for kind of waiting until, in Boston's case, literally 3 p.m. until making the biggest moves. So I'm going to say deadline day.
Deadline for sure was this year.
Yeah, I'm going to go deadline as well, because if you think about July 1st, like a lot of the signings are telegraphed ahead of time.
True.
And then you do have insiders that'll leak out like, oh yeah, so-and-so is going to sign with whoever, at 12:01. Whereas with the trade deadline, and again, particularly this year, there was so much shock and awe where it was like Rantanen in Dallas, like Brock Nelson, Colorado, like none of us expected those particular moves to happen. And even going back, last year with Thomas Hertl in Vegas, like that was completely out of the blue. So I think those are the fun ones.
Yeah, and I also just feel like, I want the trade deadline to be the most exciting, because there's more stakes around it, because we're in the season, right? We're heading towards that final run and the playoff push, versus July 1. Yeah, it's exciting, but you get the whole summer to think about it and worry about it. Like I want the now factor from the deadline because there's so much in terms of the storylines that come after the fact that you get to talk about right away, watch them play out right away versus, oh yeah, well, can't wait to see this guy show up in a different jersey at camp versus the immediate, like Brad Marchand is wearing red. What is going on? Like that stuff is exciting. All right. Well, earlier we talked a little bit about the suspension for Aaron Ekblad, the 20 games. But what's interesting is that, so it's without pay. So it's my understanding that that doesn't count against the team's cap. So people online are just talking a little bit about that seems like unfair. What if something like that had happened right before the trade deadline and this guy misses the rest of the regular season for breaking a substance policy and the team benefits from it because they have extra cap? So do you agree? Like, do you think that the salary of a player who's suspended for something like this should count against the team's cap?
This makes no sense. It's like if you want to save money, just like I know teams are not gonna like plant drugs
hey,
on
go
players,
take a steroid real quick.
It does kind of open
still.
up the possibility.
I mean, we're talking a couple days later this happens. Imagine if all of a sudden Ekblad's off the books too. It seems like a loophole that like they again, like it's one of those rules you don't think about it till you have to think about it, but then you're like, maybe we should have thought about that.
Yeah, I think it maybe if what you could do is maybe like 50% of the cap or something like that, because like if the team didn't know about this, then it's not really their fault. But I also see what you're saying. I also wonder too, like, did the NHL announce this after the trade? Like, did they know before the trade deadline and announce it afterwards? Like, I have no idea. But or was the NHL like, hey, Florida, this is happening, but do not make trades assuming that you're going to have that, like they do have that discretion where they can suddenly say to teams like, don't make a mockery of the system.
Wait, Florida could have ended up with Mikko Rantanen.
Yes. And
he was probably one of the 4 teams.
Would have broken loose. He probably was.
How many fins do they have, Ryan? They have a lot.
Luosterainen, Barkov, Lundell. Yeah, they got to get him out.
Oh, they're 1 fin away from making it.
So close. You got to have 4. All right. Well, Trevor Zegras pranked the Hockey News Anaheim reporter Patrick Present over the weekend. I watched the video. It was awesome. But has a player ever messed with you during an interview?
Yeah.
We've all got one.
You know what really kind of sucks is you go into a visiting dressing room and sometimes guys are not standing like in their stall. Case in point, back in the early 2000s, Adam Mayer was standing in Tim Connolly's stall and let me interview him for like 5 minutes. Both guys are basically bald at the time. Okay. So I thought I was talking to Tim Connolly. I thought I had some great quotes from Connolly. Ended up it was Adam Mayer and didn't tell me until the recorder was turned off. So,
that's awesome.
One of these days, Adam, I'm coming for you.
I love it.
That's a pretty good one. I had one years ago where right at the beginning of the season, I was interviewing Carey Price. They were in Toronto. And I was asking him about his summer and just, things he did. And he was talking about how he loves the rodeo and like riding horses. And I was like, oh, is that good for training? He's like, oh, yeah, it's really good for balance. I was like, oh, yeah. He's like, no. No, it's just like, I just like it. I was like, oh, okay. You got me on that one, Carey. I always thought that was pretty fun of him because he had a great deadpan when he was telling me too. I was legitimately for a couple of seconds, I was like, ooh, yeah, horseback riding. That's good for goalies. Like, like the balance and things like that. It's probably good for your core. But
call the art department. Put Carey Price on a horse now.
That's right. Yeah. So shout out to Carey Price. That was a good one.
I like it. So my very first job out of college in broadcasting, I got to cover the Erie Otters. And that year they went to the Western Conference Finals and played the London Knights. And who was on the London Knights at the time? Our good friend, Mitch Marner. So I went over to the visiting room and I had it all set up. They had already approved it. The PR guy knew I was coming over there to do a stand-up interview with him. So Mitch is like in the middle of eating, like it's morning skate. He's eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I'm like, hi, like I'm here for the interview. And like the guy brings him over to me and he's still like got the sandwich in his hand. And I'm like, do you mind just not eating it just like for like during the interview? And he's like, oh yeah, for sure. Like, I'm just going to hold it. And I was like, okay. And I'm so nervous at this point. I'm still really young. So anyways, we're like halfway through the interview and I'm asking another question. And out of the corner of my eye, I just see him bring the sandwich up to his mouth. And he starts eating it for the entire rest of the interview. And so I finished it. I just did it. And I never even used it. I literally threw the whole interview out because it was ridiculous. And I was so sad. In hindsight, I should have totally used it because it would have been hilarious. But you know, when you're young, you're like, everything has to be perfect. But yeah, to this day, I'm still mad at Mitch Marner for ruining my interview by eating his peanut butter and jelly sandwich when he couldn't have just waited 30 seconds. Very good stuff. Awesome, guys. Well, hey, we love it. Always. Those are the best parts of the job, honestly, is the fun moments where you get to have those player interactions that you tell stories about for years later. But that does it for this episode of the Hockey News. We covered a lot. We've got plenty more to break down as we get into these final weeks of the regular season. But for Ryan Kennedy and Michael Traikos, I'm Katie Gaus. Thanks for watching, and we will see you all next time.